Next year. All right, this meeting will come to order now that we have Tana here. So welcome. Let's see, I got microphone, yeah. All right, it's Tuesday, November 28, 2017. This is a special meeting of the Mercer Island City Council. Allie, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Dan Grausz.
Here.
Councilmember Celine Neese. Councilmember Wendy Weiker. Here. Councilmember David Wisenteiner.
Here.
Councilmember Benson Wong.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Debbie Bertlin. Here. Mayor Bruce Bassett.
Here. Thank you very much.
You got one person wrong and one person right.
Acker. Oh my gosh. It's too new. Excuse me, Councilmember Tana Acker. Are you here?
Yeah, here, yes.
We're on the same page.
I was wondering if I should answer this, Celine.
Sorry about that.
You were getting your special jet privileges.
So bear with me, I have a few just opening comments to this. First of all, and we're here and here, welcome to our newest council member, Tom. He was sworn in just a few minutes ago. That will happen with more pomp and circumstance in a public meeting or a more public setting at the December 5th meeting. But for all purposes, legally, you are now sworn in a council member, and the certification of the election occurred, I think, just today, right?
Yep. Just,
Yeah. And at the same time, I'd also like to thank Celine for his brief service on the council and now his brief absence from the council, because he is in this musical chairs business of things now off the council until the end of the year and until the beginning of next year, when he will be sworn back in into a different seat that he was serving in here. He is, and of course, would be welcome to attend virtually as a council member, but he had other business today, and so is not with us. Not because he's not off the council, but because he was pulled away by other things. Tonight we welcome our state representatives, Tana, Senn, and Judy Clibborn. We would have liked to have had Senator Lisa Wellman here as well, but she sent her regrets. She had another function this evening and could not attend. I think Julie is in the process of setting up a separate, smaller meeting with her to talk about the same things that we're going to talk about here this evening. We're very fortunate to have three legislators hailing from Mercer Island. 41st District obviously is a lot larger than Mercer Island, but we have our own homegrown folks who are serving us. And two who are not only from Mercer Island, but intimately familiar with council, having served on the council here. And so I think that gives us a particular boost in the kind of conversations we're having here and the things that we ask of you. In addition, not just legislators, but people who serve in key roles. Of course, Representative Clibborn is the House Transportation Chair, and Representative Senn is the Vice Chair of Early Learning and Human Services. And Senator Wellman is, I think, newly named the Chair of Early Learning and K-12 Education Committee, so bravo to her for that. We're also joined tonight by Tony Williams, who has been our advocate and lobbyist these last couple of years through the whole Sound Transit and WashDOT saga as the principal of W2A, or Washington 2 Advocates. So welcome, Tony. Glad to have you here tonight. Speaking of WashDOT and Sound Transit, of course, we all know this has been a very challenging year in which we've asked much of our legislators. And you've been staunch supporters of ours in Olympia, opening doors to meetings with the Secretary of Transportation and the Governor, as well as acting as our advocates in crafting legislation in our support. And so I want to start by saying thank you very much for that. And on behalf of all of us here at the Council and of the whole city, it certainly is much appreciated that you've been our advocates in that way. So we do have an agenda for this evening, which everybody's got a copy of, but the intent here is that this be an informal discussion. And so if we stick to the agenda, great, and if we sort of stray off it, I don't think we're going to worry too much about that either. So with that, I think we begin, though, with a recap of the legislative session by the two of you, and I'll let you take us where you will with that.
So thank you so much. It's always great to be here, and I wanted to start out by going with what you were talking about at the end, and really thanking the council for working so hard. And it was a disappointment, and I don't think I have too many things that I'm disappointed about. when I'm working in transportation. It usually works out because things happen over a long period of time. But I felt like the wheels had started turning before we could actually get to a place where we could change things that had been set in motion in 1976 for some of it. And I did not feel well served by my relationship with the DOT, and they know that. And they know that I'm not pleased. But the other thing is that I felt that in the end, people came together, even though there were a lot of different opinions about what we should do, and got us something that is valuable. So we ended up with something that means that we will have some choices that we have control over. It's not just us responding to other people. And that's, the money is big, and some of the agreements are really important for us, even if it isn't exactly what we would have wanted if we could have had everything our way. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's really important. It changed the way I related to some other things that happened over the session. I got to see Sound Transit and DOT probably not their best when they came to dealing with the small towns and cities. And I hear from small towns and cities from time to time. And so having experienced this, it makes me better. And so anyway, I'm glad that we got something that we didn't just get passed over, and that is a good thing. That was a big part of my relationship here with the city, and I have to say that I'll be really interested in what's happening now from what you're seeing, because I have not heard anything, and I have asked different people, that are in the city, actually. And so I have not heard if there's some things that we need to continue to do to follow up. So that'll be real important. I know that's on the agenda, yes. So I'm looking forward to that. This was a year, that was a crazy year with the McCleary, and I'm going to let you, since Tana is also on the Appropriations Committee, and that is where all the major decisions about all money matters other than transportation or capital. But the McCleary decision, the funding for the McCleary decision was fought tooth and nail all the way through the session and into July. And it was one of those things where the Senate, who had control of the Republicans who had control of the Senate, would not abide any other way to pay for McCleary except the property tax. And if anybody went into the negotiating room and tried to talk about any other options, people left. So there was no negotiating that went on. There was hostage taking, and the whole budget was taken hostage. And in the meantime, all of those things like social services that are so important, and all the other services that we have in the state, not just social services, all the services in the state were taken hostage in the same way. And when the budget finally came together, the people who were negotiating went into the room, and they had been negotiating all those months, and they got to bring it out and show it to us, and we had, what, a week? 2 weeks? A week? And it was what they had agreed to. So the win for the Senate Republicans was that they got the property tax. And that's I think of it as a adjustment of wealth across the state. We're taking our property tax, we're spending it across the state. And it goes really, really well if you're in Eastern Washington. So think about where people are from when they're Republicans and Democrats, and you'll see. Works really well if you're in a city or county that has low property values. But if you have high property values, then that's where they're going to get the money to even out funding for education. We didn't have a chance to see a lot of it, but we did manage to protect all of those social services and things for people that we felt were important pretty much at the level that we had wanted. So that's what the trade-off was. It wasn't just education that we got the rest of the services. Now, we also have a capital budget, this was kind of an interesting thing. The capital budget is, everybody was fine with it. It funds schools, it funds hospitals, it funds projects in cities all across state and everybody, but it was taken hostage also by the Senate Republicans because there is a court decision on water usage that impacts the whole state. The decision came down and it changes the way we have to measure water, I guess is the best way to do it. And it is very complicated. I just sat through a luncheon where Larry Springer, who is the lead for us in the House, tried to explain it. It's very complicated. It has to do with tribes. It has to do with the Department of Ecology. It has to do with rural water versus city water. It impacts people who might be trying to build a house. They have a permit. They can't get water. So they are standing there waiting for their permit. Trying to come up with something that was a process to work on. No way. So we didn't pass the capital budget, although we passed it to the Senate, but we did not pass as a legislature the capital budget. And Hearst is still being worked on as this whole summer. So it was contentious. It was a contentious year. It was long, it was hard, and people didn't go away feeling good. I will tell you that I worked really hard on the car tabs issue to try and get the new depreciation schedule. We had a bill we sent to the Senate 5 times, and they just wanted to take Sound Transit down. You know, I mean, they were, we've all been angry at Sound Transit, so you know how that feels, but people had voted for those things, and you can't just take it down. So they didn't pass the relief for taxpayers. So that will be the first bill that we're going to send over this year, is that will give people some relief. It will be more fair. It will not be something that makes people happy because what they voted in is very large on their car tabs. But I will say, it is my estimation that most people do not understand what their property taxes are going to be like, and it will be nothing like our license tabs. It will be a primal screen across the Eastside here, because our property taxes are going to go berserk. And we all voted no, but powers that be. So it was really a difficult time for us this year, and a lot of other things didn't get taken care of because we spent all of our time trying to get those things taken care of. And I think that's what I take away from that. I'll probably think of something else. If you start talking, then we can tag team.
It's great to be back here. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody. Yes, legislative session was very long, longest in state history. Not something that we should brag about, but that's the way that it ended up. And really this session was focused on mental health and on education, for sure, in terms of what the legislature had to deal with in addition to passing a budget. Obviously a lot of our attention was very focused on this transportation issue, on Sound Transit, on the HOV tunnel issue, so kind of beyond legislative work, and Judy really led the effort on that and did a yeoman's job, and it was amazing to watch her work. And I also just have to say, what the legislature did do on time in the regular session, the one budget that we did pass on time was the transportation budget, which Representative Clibborn's in charge of.
I forgot that.
So capital budget, we didn't do. Operating budget, we did extremely late, and transportation budget, we did right on time. And so that is commendable, and just also shows Representative Clibborn's great work across the aisle and just kind of over the years. And so that was really a great thing to see. So I won't talk on transportation as much. I'll focus on some of these other issues, as I'm sure there'll be questions, and I'll just point to her on the transportation issues. One of the big things that we came away from the session, other than McCleary, which I'll spend a little bit of time on in a minute, but we passed paid family leave. And so that was really towards the end of session, while we were waiting for kind of negotiators to figure out some of the budget decisions. There was also a whole handful of people focusing on paid family leave. And that was the 5th state in the country to have paid family leave, and that is going to kick in 2019. and that'll be both an employee and an employer paid program, and people will be able to take leave for a birth of a child, adoption of a child, their own illness, or a family member's illness. And so that, I think, is very exciting, and that was a momentous passage in the legislature last year. The other thing that we obviously really focused on was McCleary, which is funding public education. And the goal was really to make sure that kids around the state had high quality education. And what was interesting about that is I think people would focus on our school districts, frankly, about showing how well funded they were in great part by our levies and the generosity of our communities, and talking about how other school districts needed to come up to our level. One thing I would point out is we have amazing schools, unbelievable. I've got 2 kids in schools, and I really appreciate the work. But I would also say, if you ask the schools, that I wouldn't say that they are fully funded at the levels that the great levels that we have right here. So as you guys know, we pay for school counselors as a city. The school district doesn't pay for them completely. So just even that kind of example, when we talk about bringing all the other school districts up to maybe our levels or evening the playing field, there's still some room to go in even here. But what we focused on was making sure that the state was paying for teacher salaries versus relying on local levies to do that. So that was really a major emphasis, was making sure that the state was covering teacher and administrative salaries. So when we looked at what was being paid for by local levies, on average, $14,000 of every teacher's salary was being paid for by a local levy instead of by the state. And about $40,000 for administrators were being paid for by local levies instead of by the state. So we needed to shift that responsibility of payment from local levies to state to meet basic education. So that was what a lot of the property tax dollars that we added to the education pie was to pay for those the teacher pay and administrator pay. And what we did get in there too is some regionalization pay, so recognizing that the cost of living is higher in some areas than in others, and so wanting to make sure that it wasn't just $45,000 for every teacher across the board, but it depended on where you lived, you had a different range. And also making sure that starting teachers did have a living wage salary of about $45,000. And again, that varies depending on regional pay. So that was a big component of that. One of the aspects of passing McCleary also was, as we increased property taxes to be paid for by the state, we limited what levy dollars could be funded, what could be the level at which they could be levied on the community and what they could be used for. And so there are definitely some interesting changes and things that I know the school boards and school districts around the state will be and are encouraging us to change, I'll say gently, because we limited some, for instance, around special education funding. That's supposed to be fully funded as part of basic education, but I haven't met a school district yet who thinks that we have put in enough money to actually meet the need of special education costs. So there's still work to do, but we did do a great effort on that. Again, on the property taxes, Representative Clibborn mentioned Eastside legislators voted against the property tax increase as the way to pay for this education improvement dollars. If you think about, especially as the City Council grapples with your funding and your budget going forward, cities, counties, school districts really rely almost exclusively on property taxes to fund your budget. Maybe a utility tax here and there, something like that, but in general, it's property tax. The state, on the other hand, has so many other options for revenue. Sales tax, which we didn't want to do because that's regressive, B&O tax reform, REIT taxes, capital gains tax, income tax, not saying that these were all on the table, but we have carbon tax, we have a whole variety of tools that we could explore and utilized, but local cities, counties, school districts really only rely on property tax. So for the state to use that as the way to fund education really hurt, I think, localities and junior taxing districts across the state. Also, I would argue it means that 100% of our constituents are paying more money into the, including seniors and people on fixed incomes or low income, whereas a capital gains tax or something else would maybe impact 3% of the population to pay in instead of that 100%. So regardless, we ended up with a property tax increase, and that is something that you guys will see probably hit in February, and that might be surprising to some folks. As Representative Clibborn also mentioned, the trade-off in the ultimate budget was between the funding source and then getting the policies that kind of Democrats in the House wanted. And we were more concerned about making sure the safety net was maintained, that we did increases for instance, supportive living and other service providers to make sure that we didn't lose services for our most vulnerable. And so we really traded off the immediate impacts to people and the policies that were going to impact people right away versus the property tax coming up as a funding source that potentially in this coming legislative session maybe we can tweak. We'll see, but that was really ended up being the big trade-off. So other things that we passed that just want to mention this past session, we did a lot of work around mental health. We did some work around children's mental health. We did some work around expanding early learning. Again, paid family leave. So there were some really great advances, and there's still lots of work to do this coming session. I'll leave it there.
Thank you both. So the second item on the agenda is discuss 2017 legislative priorities, results, and actions. Kirsten, are you going to take this? Because we didn't actually talk about how we were going to work through this, and it would probably be unfair to ask our representatives to recall exactly what was on our agenda and how the specific things went. But yeah, well, of course, some of it, but how did you want to coordinate that?
I do have a summary. Julie, do we want to do that before we ask them to have a look at more of a look ahead at 2018 or ask questions?
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, so in terms of what you've got here, it was recap to give them a clear capital budget, what to expect in 2018, and how can the city council support you. And so you had that wrapped up as one agenda.
Or maybe there are questions.
Well, while you're thinking about it, one other major thing that I'll mention that thinking about local government issues, another thing that we passed that local governments care about was also public records, some public records reform. And I think coming up for this legislative session, because I'm thinking about AWC and other things like that, there are a fair amount of local government issues that hopefully we'll be able to work on and continue to address as well.
Do you want us to talk about what we're going to see? We can do that. Yeah, I think go ahead with that.
Okay. All right, so I will give you a brief rundown of Mercer Island's 2017 legislative priorities, results, and actions. There's a fuller discussion in the agenda packet. So we had 9 priorities, which was quite a lot. Yeah. we bunched some together to keep it tonight. So the first was to maintain full access to I-90 R8A lanes, and the city engaged in an intense, multi-pronged effort to press all parties to honor commitments to protect Mercer Island's mobility and access to I-90. While the federal government does not have the authority to grant exceptions to current law regarding HOV lanes access, even for on-ramps, we continue to look for opportunities to improve mobility and access, and will continue to do so in 2018. Our second priority was fully fund education, but that has already been discussed very well by our representatives. So we'll move on to the third priority, which was to allocate recreation and transportation funding for the Aubrey Davis Park Master Plan. And funding was introduced by Representative Clibborn's office, and the city and other supporters lobbied for its inclusion in the capital budget. It did not get included, but we are planning to join with other regional bike corridor communities to include a request for 2018. Excuse me. Number 4 was to adjust the property tax cap, and 2 bills were introduced, but they were not passed. And that's definitely something that will be on the agenda for AWC. Well, AWC had, and Sound Cities, both are looking at those priorities. So the 5th priority was to enhance health and human services. And we specifically were asking for the increase for the purchase age for tobacco and vapor products from 18 to 21. Bills were requested by the Attorney General and Department of Health, but did not make it out of committee. A similar bill is expected in 2018. And the second was to expand access to treatment for opiate use disorder and overdose education and prevention. And ESHB, I don't have the number, sorry, was passed that did enhance opiate treatment. And number 6 was to preserve the environment, and we had a number of items. And for number 1, an agreement was reached to retire half of the Colstrip, Montana coal-fired power plant in 2027. 2, SB 5939 passed, which revised and extended an incentive for renewable electricity generated from wind and solar. Number 3, a bill establishing a carbon emissions tax failed to advance from committee. The city signed onto a letter to the UTC regarding electrical vehicle charging equipment, electricity rates, and network planning. There was no significant action on green building and energy efficiency, but the city did sign on to an August 2017 letter to the UTC asking PSE to ensure equitable distribution of closure costs for the Colstrip power plant and to accelerate the closure of the other half of the plant earlier than 2035. So, and for number 7, which was to address the housing and homelessness crisis, there was, if I'm reading this right, E2 SSB 5254 extended the $40 surcharge on recording documents to provide funding for local homeless housing and assistance, and that was extended to June of 2023. It was set to expire in June of 2019. Other bills did not pass. And for number 8, providing cost recovery for long-range planning and code enforcement, there was no action in 2017, although we did establish that we could fund code enforcement for permitting activities through permit fees. And then finally, our last priority was to support the AWC and SCA legislative priorities. And in the agenda bill, there are attached some AWC outcomes. They have a long list. I don't think I will go through those, but and SCA also, their priorities for last year were to adjust the property tax cap, to invest in health services, and to address the housing and homelessness crisis. And all of those have been mentioned elsewhere. So that is the rundown for your 2017 or Mercer Island, City of Mercer Island 2017 priorities.
Thank you. So I want to make sure we get to a conversation here rather than just asking you to talk or asking the person to talk, but I'm not quite sure how to exactly enter into that unless maybe just open it up here and say, Councilmembers, where would you like to begin the next part of this conversation?
I'm just wondering, since we're trying to develop a 2018 legislative agenda. I'm wondering whether or not it might make some sense just to actually go back through this list one by one. If there's some follow-up that needs to be done, or whether or not we need to carry it over to 2018 or identify things that have been done. You know, for instance, on the number one on the I-90 access, obviously a lot of that issue has been addressed, but what is still open, because we basically committed to the community that we were trying to maintain single occupancy vehicle access on the Island Crest Way. We have our government lobbyists here who can perhaps elaborate on what efforts are still available to us, what can be done, and other options. But you know, I think as far as an orderly way of doing this, that's what I would think. That's a suggestion for go forward.
Sounds fine to me. Any objection or
No,
thoughts?
go ahead. I think that's helpful, because some of the bills that you mentioned, you know, passed, and some of them, they go in 2 years. They're still alive. It's the fact that they didn't pass. So it's good to know which ones you have you want us to put our back into, and certainly asking for some re-upping. The capital budget is still, the last capital budget isn't passed, so I don't know how it's going to work to ask for new things in the old capital budget, or do we get a new capital budget on top of the old one? I don't know. This has not happened before, but I'm thinking about the bike. You know, that would be helpful to do, to try and get that in, and so that's good to have it on the list. I need to know what it is you're working on for opening up the lanes on I-90 and Mount Grausz. So I have not talked to anybody.
And I know we put that item on here about kind of how to, well, naturally, Sound Transit put in mitigation, you know, on North Mercer Way, the lights at 77th and 76. So there are lights there, and it did help with, because we certainly thought everything was going to grind to a halt and was going to have lots of problems in our town center. But they installed that mitigation, and it has helped. We've done some traffic counts, and we've seen where the traffic patterns are going. But naturally, we are seeing some issues with the I-90 on-ramps, off-ramps. So for instance, at West Mercer Way, we're seeing, because traffic is diverting that way, typically they would go Island Crest Way, but naturally, as we predicted, traffic is using West Mercer Way, and so we're seeing some queues, some backups, so it's just a question of, and we have to talk this through, but there's two lanes. One is a general purpose lane, one is an HOV lane. Should that be changed? Would that help with the queuing? So that's one question. Another, we have received a number of resident complaints about I-90 and Island Crest Way. In the middle of the day, people who are trying to exit, and they're heading westbound, they're trying to exit at Island Crest Way, and they're nervous because the queuing is happening on I-90, and so what can we do there? Is there something there? And obviously, maybe people don't know this, but the traffic signals are being all managed by WashDOT. The city doesn't manage those are WashDOT property, they maintain those. So what could we do there? So there's some questions about that. I think the other question we had, I think back in June when we had our first public meeting about the traffic was, okay, we've lost Island Crest Way for single occupant vehicles, but is there the ability to at least have that capacity after 7 p.m., you know, like the rest of I-90, or you know, those questions about timed HOV, or what are the options for hot? And so the question in our mind is Island Crest Way totally off the table, or is that something worth pursuing? And more of it is, we want to have a conversation with you about what's realistic, what should we put our efforts into, the good news is, the good news really is we're not seeing the terrible traffic impacts that we were predicting. I think that's overall what the data is showing. So that's good, but over time, we think we'll have other issues, and certainly the I-90 on ramp and off ramps are a problem, and you probably see it too.
I actually experienced it, and I wondered, it brings to mind that if, because I had not heard anybody else complaining about it, I noticed it. What I would find
you share
very
it with us,
helpful
you
is
share it with WashDOT.
for everybody to, when you share it with WashDOT, will you also share it with me?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because then I can bird dog it. And
Okay.
the thing is that I'd like to know all the things that you've picked up on, so that we know, is it a matter of changing the timing at the top so they can get
Right.
off? That's what I thought, is that they're backing people up at a light, is it too long? And they need to come out and readjust that, and that's part of their job. So they'll have to do those kinds of things. As far as going after a change in HOV or hot lanes, I mean, hot lanes is a whole nother subject, which that's not popular. But, to pay to get off the island doesn't sound like anything I want to propose, but if you want to ask for it, go right ahead. But I do think that if you can fix the throughput, what we have is a change on I-90. We're being impacted by I-90, not by our entrances and exits, as much as you now have an extra lane going in the opposite direction that we didn't have before. So it's extra going the opposite way, but it's one less going the way that used to have 4 lanes and now they have 3. So that, I think, you see, is a complete corridor issue. And I think it would be counterproductive until they get the corridor kind of fixed and they know how it's flowing, to ask to put more cars in there, because that isn't going either. There's just not enough lanes because we're down from those 2 lanes. But I would like to know what's happening on Mercer Island and what kinds of, they come in, we don't have to come up with a solution. We can have them come in and use their studies, and they can take their time and their money to figure out how to make it flow. But we have to tell them where it's not. And we can ask them to come back and redo their studies, and we can use our things that you've measured and show them. But put the onus on them to go ahead and figure out what the solution is. Because it may be, I noticed that there's a couple of lights that you shouldn't be stopping twice. It should be moving. If you're going the speed limit, you should be able to drive all that way on North Mercer and not stop. So there's those kinds of things.
Is that something that's done through government? Would that request be something done through you?
Oh, I think you can ask DOT and then just tell me and I'll ask DOT.
On the federal side, I was not going to be like passing the buck, but any play we have in DC is predicated upon WashDOT saying, okay, here's what we want to do as a result of what's been happening here, and we need the delegation or whatnot to be helpful on so that sounds a little like pass it back to WashDOT, but really it is sort of the ball is in their court, which is what I've been frustrated about for some time. On the positive side, the delegation continues to ask, well, is there something to do? I was just there 2 weeks ago and on other topics related to the tax bill and all that, and it came up in 2 or 3 different settings. We've been following this. Sound Transit actually called me a few weeks ago to say, hey, this may have come up here or something, but anyway, they're asking, is there something continuing to do? So, maybe, my sort of takeaway out of this, Julie, is it does seem like it's timely to think about whenever you feel it's the best time, but timely to prepare some communication that around what's going on and what things might need to be done or whatever that can be spread more broadly. Because there continues to be people who are interested in the topic.
Can we include that HOV access after 7, like it is around?
Yeah, because that was one of the things.
I think that'd be simple.
Right, and that at one point, that even came from the folks in DC.
I think that would be something they would.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right.
If I could, we'll just swing this back and forth. So we put that question to WashDOT, of course, and they expressed a desire to let the whole system settle down before they begin to study that. But I think it's one of those things where, well, it's, you know, but it's been several months now, and so perhaps it is time for, enough time has passed for them to be ready to embark on that review.
Yeah, and actually, you know, thinking back to just being in DC a couple weeks ago, I was kind of caught off guard at a couple of places, people asking me this, because that wasn't what I was there to talk about mostly, but secondly, it'd been a while since people had asked, but I think people are curious for some sort of communication from us. Not just the communication, but is there an action? Now, of course, the challenge with anything in DC. I mean, Judy, I enjoyed it, Tana, your report about the state of Washington and your frustrations, and as frustrating as you may find them, I can assure you it is worse in our nation's capital, and so, so anyway, there you go. Now, having, you know, but I will just say, you know, they may do some sort of end of the year bill this year, so that's at least something that begins to look like process, although the Democrats chose not to go down and meet with our the president today. So anyway, those are things we can't control, but we can control what we're communicating.
I have two general questions. I'm pretty new to this, so forgive my naive approach maybe. Have we had any complaints about eastbound I-90? Because it seems like there's a juggernaut, and I drive that way every day, and that traffic has gotten horribly worse. And then the second thing is, before I logged off the next door and gave it the big farewell, I had a post up about, you know, where are we with accident data? And I got private message after private message about accidents on I-90 heading into Seattle, and I just wondered if we have any data, or if Judy, Representative Clibborn, could help us get any actual data that shows us that there has been any sort of adverse impact to safety.
Yeah, I can't answer the I-90 accident question, but yes, we are experiencing problems with heading eastbound as well, because as you know.
Morning and afternoon?
Primarily in the morning, because it's backing on 36, right? And so that's something also we're looking at. Again, recall the 2 lanes are one general purpose, one HOV, they're metered, and 405 is a nightmare. And so I think we're concluding it's 405 issues happening there and spilling onto our local streets. And of course, that's another one where we're like, would it help to change those to 2 GP lanes? Would that help? I don't know. I mean,
It's an X factor. It's more than just 405, because when you get to 405, it clears up. But you have everybody going across from the East Mercer on-ramp, the right-hand lanes and the left-hand lanes trying to get to either 405 north or south. So when you have the cars converging on East Mercer Way trying to get in the left-hand lanes, and the other one's going across, you have the X factor.
so you're saying that but that's not on our roads, those are on 90?
It's on I-90, and it's,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, and I don't know the reason, but it's gotten really
Yeah.
bad since the implementation of RAA.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm concerned about the backups we're experiencing here, and it goes all the way to Gallagher Hill. I mean,
Yeah.
it can be tremendous, and it's not constant. You know, it's hit or miss. It's so that is something else we'll put on our WashDOT
Yeah,
list too.
accident data, but
Yeah.
so we should ask for all of that. And we should ask for what's happening on I-90 that they see, because they monitor that all the time.
They do, and I mean, to be fair, they have been cooperative. I mean, whenever we get a citizen complaint about I-90, we shoot it off to WashDOT. They get it, and there are times where they have gone out and adjusted those signals. So they are trying to be responsive, but I definitely think things that may require more study and analysis may require some of your nudging, guessing, so.
Nudging, that's a good
not quite sure where we are. Maybe what we've done is accomplish Benson's suggestion of going back through these item by item with more detail, and we've just finished item 1. Does that make sense? So that we then
I'm
are
loving
moving
it because I have nothing to do with that. I may go home and have dinner and hang out.
So with that, is there anything more for Tony? Because then we will let him go home and have dinner if there is not.
I was going to make one last comment on number 1. I think, like, swoop in from the head sometime. Given that it was our number 1 legislative priority in the previous year, and we obviously didn't prevail in the way that we thought we did, I don't think it changes our desire to prevail on that topic going forward. And I know that we haven't let our foot off the gas in Washington as we try and pursue that with the Department of Transportation, but it would be great to hear an articulation of what the strategy is in Olympia to try and help us achieve that. And it sounds like there's a number of sort of a menu of items that from best to maybe least optimal that could be achieved. But if we could understand how you all are thinking strategically about how we do as much as we can at the state level to try and achieve what I think citizens have really been hot about as we're pushing, as Tony's pushing in Washington simultaneously. And that may not be something we can do this evening, but I think that would be great.
Yeah, I think the answer really lies in the feds. I mean, we gave it the full court press here. We did everything I thought that we could and left no stone unturned. But if the answer is no, and they're not open to it, we're not going to get anything from Bassett. So until we know that we can get something out of the feds, and that will have to come down through the pipeline. I think more importantly, rather than go in and start asking for these things, is to watch how I-90 calms down. Because we do have a different I-90. When you take away 2 lanes, 1 lane each way, you have a different I-90. It has nothing to do with us. It has to do with the fact that it's different. And if you ask to put more in, you can't justify it. You cannot justify putting our cars into I-90's HOV lanes. The answer will be no, because it's already crowded. So I think what we have to do is let it calm down, see if it's open for the feds, and then we ask, because there's capacity there, we'd like to be put in there. So it would not be something I would do this year at all. It isn't going to be, I could ask, and it won't get any attention. I want to go in when people will pay attention. Because we don't know what the capacity is in those HOV lanes until we get everybody sort of used to it. And I hear Tom saying that, that crossover that is occurring, that weaving, maybe there's something that they could do to fix that and move the traffic better. Because it certainly is that bad. And it will be years before we have that interchange, anything fixed on that interchange. It'll probably be 5-6 years before we'd ever have any money on that interchange to make that work better so it won't back up. So the investments that you have globally in the region will eventually help, but that's not going to make any difference in that HOV lane and give us capacity to put in single occupancy.
One particular area is going to get worse when that one particular area is going to get worse with the Bellevue Way construction and when they move to that reversible lane.
I think you're excused.
I think so. I think so.
But we have your number.
Well, obviously, we're continuing to work with Julie, and we'll continue to, I think the idea of coming up with something to communicate, I like your term, that they knew I-90, SLE access, I think that's not what our play is. Our play is around what's happening and how to mitigate all of that and see what openings might develop as a result of that. So I think that's a good thought for all this. But mostly, since I am here, and before I go, I do want to say to all of you that this was quite a journey. And I know that we had lots of plans that didn't quite go the way we went, but on the other hand, and I know this may not be the tonic that all of you want, I mean, you know, where we ended up with Sound Transit was in a good place in terms of the kind of commitment they're making to the community. And I realize, again, some of you will look at that and say that's not what you wanted, and yet there are other communities now going to Sound Transit and saying they want the Mercer Island deal. So, I mean, every community gets to look and ask themselves what it is they think they want, and everybody has a vision for whatever they want it is. But I do want to point out that it is sort of interesting to me that I've now had